I'm going to talk about Sidetracked and All the Anxious Girls on Earth, and that's James's meal for today. I'm having a very boring meal because I have a headache, and I don't know if I can handle more than that. So, anyway,
hopefully you can stand the noise of
the workers, neighbors getting a roof done.
Yeah, so the dogs, while Pauline was out for a while, the dogs went out on the deck, and they were really mad because they could see these people up on the roof stealing our neighbor's roof, I think was it.
Yeah, I didn't write in what this was about again. I haven't been doing a great job with the book reviews, but I have to say, I believe that I've watched Kurt Wallander Mysteries, and I may have reviewed
on TV?
them. Yes, I think so. And this was, what did it say? #1 international bestseller.
So Kurt Wallander is a detective then? And,
yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to make that clear. And not the writer.
No. And I really enjoyed reading this. It was very well written. There were some things where I guess the language was a little bit, even though this is translated, I don't know languages like James does, so it's not, so this was translated from the original Swedish, I imagine. Yep, Swedish. And so there's some things I don't know if the words are really, I can't remember any offhand, but there were some instances where I was reading and I was like, oh, that's what they're talking about. You know, which
context?
Yeah, which was, you know, it just didn't quite fit.
They would have translated all the Swedish words, right?
Yeah, but there were some things like
a lot of Latin stuff.
It's like one time somebody was going to the washroom and it wasn't something that we'd say or something like that. I don't know what. There were other instances too. I can't remember, but it's just not. There was something lost in translation there. Anyway. This was one of the best books I have ever read. And at first, I read the first story and I was like, I don't want to read it. And I passed it on to James. And it was a funny thing though, you know, so I had got my message. I've been talking to angels. And so I got my message of the day through the Doreen Virtue book that I have. I just ask, what's my message of the day? And I flip until the page feels right, and then I look at it, and there it is. And so it told me that day, it said, start in the middle. And so I was going to pick a book to read, so I picked the book out of the middle, and that was this one. And I had just asked a question that day, earlier, that I was like, am I supposed to buy a place with my sister? Like, she wanted to buy an island in the middle of a lake or something, and I'm like,
in the middle of BC.
That's weird. You know, for her, she's a city woman, and for her to be, anyway, so I was going through that, and so I picked this book, and the first story answered my question. It was, there's a poem in here. Wearing a stiffened dress of scaly bark, she moves like thickened shadows through the trees that would much rather see her naked stark, which is awful. But then unclothed, most likely she would freeze, her street flesh so unused to forest air, nearby a creature stirs within its lair. And soon a coffee-colored feeling spills so slowly down her loins and finally kills her longing to be one with all these beasts of rooted wood, that she had thought the bush was something more than ground gone wild and lush, was simply foolish on her part, a feast of folly, a thin penny dropped in haste, a high ideal best left alone, not chased. And it's funny because this poem in the story, this is a book of short stories, I should say, was sent to the woman who had moved into the middle of nowhere in British Columbia. And she was thinking about how her mail, she had to go like 32 miles away to get her mail. And it didn't get delivered, right? Because she was in the middle of nowhere. And so this poem came from her brother. And so that answered my question right away. I was like, no, my sister does not want to move to the middle of nowhere. She will regret that. So So anyway, so I went through this book. After reading the story, I was like, God, I don't know. And so I passed it along to James. I was just going to put it in the little library. And he was like, no, because it's a Canadian author, and he likes to hang on to the Canadian authors anyway. So then I read the book, and I continued on. I had just this past few weeks, I was writing well, first I started writing a letter, and then it ended up being 70 pages long. So it was the beginnings of a book. And then in between reading the first story and then writing 70 pages, and then I got back to the book, and my comment was I was meant to read this book to help me write out mine. I just wrote a couple Old Testament apocalyptic stuff, page 33 story, and actually she goes on to more apocalyptic stuff later. A poster of a cat that said "Hang in there," page 64 story, page 87 is the cat thing. And I just wrote about a cat, well, a kitten, hang in there poster. That story is about a woman talking to a fetus, and that she lost, I should say. Anyway, page 104 story, caste system, untouchables. Honestly, I had just gotten done writing a bunch of stuff all about the same thing, and it was like I was obviously supposed to pick up this book and say it was supposed to remind me of all of this stuff to write, but as it turned out, I wrote it without being reminded. But still, picking this up at the same time, that is bizarre. And later on in the last story, she's talking about how she's talking about being dead. Anyway, and so she's like, now being dead's great. Now that I'm dead, I'm writing all this poetry and this and that. And I've been referring to myself as dead for the past few years. And I got a lot of poetry written. So thank you, Zsuzsi Gartner. Thank you. This was obviously written for me to pick up and read. And it helped me immensely. So anyway, even though I'd written the stuff without having read first, but having picked this up at the same time as I was writing, that makes me know that there is nothing coincidental about my talking to angels right now, which is that gives me some strength of mind, as one could imagine one would be needing when they're talking to angels all of a sudden. So thank you. Now, medicines to help us. This is a Métis Plant Use Resource Guide. Now, this is more of an art project than it was a book, and I have to say that I really enjoyed it. It's just there's not a lot of information there. The book is actually only like little tiny, yeah, and
it's like an art magazine.
It really is. But
I haven't even seen it, but
no.
I know what art magazines are like.
But there is one place in the book where there's the different names for like the same plant and different native names, which I thought James would really enjoy. So yeah. I renewed it so that he can look through it.
Yeah, that's something like that.
Yeah. So anyway, I would recommend you read all of the books that I showed you today, especially the Zsuzsi Gartner one, because wow, you're a good author, Zsuzsi Gartner. That was some good reading. I'm sorry I put it down after the first story, because I really enjoyed it later on. So anyway, boy, wind might blow them right off, we'll see. So you go ahead and review your stuff. I think you have stuff to review, do you not? Well, there you go, go ahead.
We haven't put out
a video in a while, yeah.
Not all of this is necessarily going to come recommended. So I reviewed The Island, it's just called, by Aldous Huxley. He's one of my favorite writers when I was a kid, when I was about 20 years old. But the whole thing is, I used to say when people ask me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "Mature." And I think the whole idea with getting older, not necessarily getting old, is getting more mature. So on mature reading, this is one that I didn't read. I read almost all of his stuff pretty well this summer after I turned 20. I was 20 years old. Just blasted through the novels and essays. But this is one essay, it's an extended essay, that I never got around to. And it kind of, this was written in 1944, I believe, or 45, during World War II. And I don't know when exactly he turned to kind of a popularization of Buddhism or something like that, but it seems to have been as early as this. So it starts to explain why Brave New World is dystopia, right? It's one where they all, it's kind of like a lot of people consider utopia. There's so many, like it's affluence and all this sort of stuff. He's against that. And so he's got this idea that there's a perennial philosophy. Also, he should really say universal, but maybe that's understood. I don't know. So he's got this idea that you can find this philosophy, this wonderful philosophy, in most religious traditions, and he has a hard time finding Calvinism. Calvinism is one of his, Jean Calvin is one of his whipping boys and stuff like that. And what else? He has trouble with communism, and anyone who doesn't have trouble with communism has got troubles. But having trouble with Calvinism is ridiculous, really. So what this is just a continuation of Romanticism. What happened was people hated the Enlightenment and all the stuff that came with it. And there were some not great things that came with it, things like pollution and stuff. Environmental degradation has been with us for a long time. People overgraze with sheep and goats and stuff like that. And they end up creating deserts or places where there are no forests. Scotland's an example, and stuff like that. Scotland manages to do okay without it. When you do it in the Sahel region and North Africa, you're in trouble. So when when deforestation and stuff like that, and drying up, is desiccation in those areas is blamed on